One of the most common things people ask me is whether Earth exists in the Star Wars universe. And I mean, I've thought that it does, and I've always kind of thought that it does. And if you go back to the very first thing we learn about Star Wars, it's that it exists a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So I mean, the whole story is put in reference to the viewer, who's obviously on Earth. But I mean, obviously that's not a very satisfactory answer. Perhaps that line is just a throwaway to set up good storytelling. So let's look at other references to Earth within the Star Wars universe. So first off, and just to get this out of the way, there are a ton of crossovers between the Star Wars universe and our universe. Obviously, humans are in both of them, and that's probably the most basic thing. But there's also things like dogs and deers and ferrets and even hamsters mentioned in various Star Wars stories. Now again, obviously that doesn't prove anything. It doesn't prove that, we exist in the Star Wars universe, but clearly the two universes biologically are relatively similar. Things like angels and zombies and even hell are also mentioned in the Star Wars universe, but again, that doesn't really prove that we exist as well in the universe, just that, the belief systems of the two are somehow similar. However, aside from the crossover of ideas and creatures, there's also some other crossover that happens between the stories. The first one, and the one most people probably know about, is that in episode 1, in one of the Senate shots, you can see creatures that look kind of like E.T. Well, actually, they look exactly like E.T. the extraterrestrial. And of course, E.T. visits Earth, which suggests some sort of possible connection, though not necessarily, although this is obviously just meant to be a gag, and in the E.T. movie, you can actually see someone dressed up in a Yoda costume, so clearly the E.T. movie exists in a universe where Star Wars is a fictional entity. There's also one of the Soul Calibur games where various Star Wars characters, including Darth Vader, fought battles on Earth, although this is clearly just a crossover and doesn't give us any insight into how the actual universe works. And I mean, similarly, we're not going to point to R2-D2 and C-3PO's Christmas album, and yes, Christmas in the Stars was a real Star Wars Christmas album. We're not going to point to that as proof that, Star Wars and our universe are one and the same. And I mean, there's a lot of things like that where it's pure marketing. I remember when I was a kid, I went to MGM Studios in Florida, and there was a Star Wars ride where basically it was a simulator and R2-D2 would take you from Earth on a journey around the galaxy, but that obviously isn't meant to reflect the canon. So everything I've looked at so far has kind of been an indirect reference to Earth within the Star Wars universe, or perhaps like a kind of little connection, but there were actually two non-canon storylines which would have connected the two universes had they been canon. And the first is Into the Great Unknown, and I'm not going to cover this one too much because I've kind of talked about it before in my What Ifs video, but basically Han Solo and Chewbacca land on Earth after their hyperdrive malfunctions. Han is eventually killed by some primitive natives on the planet, and his body is later discovered by Indiana Jones. So that's obviously a silly story just meant to be a bit of fun. However, there was also the book Alien Exodus, which at one point was actually planned to be canonized, but it wasn't, and it was never finished, so it remains non-canon, but it's still interesting, and it talks about, in a more official and more serious capacity, Earth's place within the Star Wars universe. The basic idea behind this story is that in the 25th century, after a computer uprising, a group of humans are fleeing the planet Earth, and they're trying to get to Alpha Centauri. However, they run into a wormhole, and this wormhole transports them across the universe into another galaxy and also back in time, which explains, of course, the introduction to the Star Wars movies. And this would have basically been the introduction of humans into the Star Wars universe. It would have been where they started, because at this point there would have been no other humans in the galaxy, and they all would have migrated from Earth, essentially. However, as I said, this was never canonized, and it always remained purely non-canon, not even Legends material. And I mean, let's be honest, that's probably good, because this was a little silly. And this idea of humans coming from another galaxy has been ignored by subsequent sources, which usually say that they came from Coruscant. So this story obviously has very little, value in helping us answer this question. And there's not really much else that we know. All we know is that this story was at one point planned. We know that there are various connections between our universe and the Star Wars universe. Whether that means they're the one and the same is kind of another question, but we know that there are those connections. But it's really hard nonetheless to answer the question of whether we exist in the Star Wars universe, or whether Earth more accurately exists in the Star Wars universe, because we just don't know and it hasn't been answered. But the fact that every single movie starts a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away really tells me everything I need to know. Earth exists in the Star Wars universe, but humans of Earth and Earth itself is never to be a part of the Star Wars storyline. And to be honest, I think that Earth is best relegated to one-off, fun, non-fiction stories like Into the Great Unknown. Anyways, guys, really sorry I couldn't give you a good, strict answer to this. I mean, the short version is that Star Wars has never featured Earth in a canon storyline. However, the opening crawl at least suggests that they are in the same universe. I hope you guys still enjoyed this video, and if you have any ideas for what you want next, please leave it down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you had a good weekend. May the Force be with you.